So in a previous video, I went over some strength and weaken questions that involve a timeline aspect. And here I'm going to do the same thing for questions that ask us to logically complete the text. And the main thing that I recommend, whether it's a strength and weaken question or a logically completing question, is to actually sketch out a timeline. I know that you can't do that on the screen, but you have scrap paper, and that's a very simple but efficient way of organizing the information in your head. Especially when you have a question like this that throws all sorts of different dates at us. It's just a lot of stuff to keep in your head. So use your pencil and paper to your advantage. And so let's just go ahead and read this one here. It says that the Cretaceous period lasted from approximately 145 million years ago to 66 million years ago. Okay, so Cretaceous period, 145 million years ago to 66 million years ago. And so fossilized dinosaur remains from all periods of the Cretaceous have been found in North America, including the Cedar Mountain Formation fossils from the early Cretaceous, 130 million years ago, excavated in the 1990s. So this is not really part of our timeline, but it's associated with that date, or associated with that finding. Okay, the Cedar Mountain Formation fossils, and then the Hell Creek Formation fossils from the very end of the Cretaceous, 68 to 66 million years ago, and those were excavated in the early 20th century. I'll just say 1910s. That's kind of early. Okay, somewhere during the late Cretaceous period, roughly between 80 and 66 million years ago, feathered dinosaurs became much more widespread. This fact helps explain why evidence of feathers is abundant in blank. Okay, so if feathered dinosaurs start to appear or start to become much more widespread at this point in time, that would suggest, and here, let me just add that to the color coding here. So feathered dinosaurs became much more widespread. So what does that mean in terms of our sequence of events? Well, if feathered dinosaurs only became widespread here, that means we would not expect feathered dinosaur fossils to be found here, or at least we wouldn't expect many of them to be found. Whereas when we come back to this area, the Hell Creek Formation, it would make sense that some feathered dinosaurs would indeed be found, given that they had begun appearing prior to the formation of these fossils. Okay, and so now that we have this in place, we know what we're looking for. We have a clear before and after. These fossils were formed before the proliferation of feathered dinosaurs. These fossils were formed after it, so we would expect to see evidence of feathered dinosaurs here and not here. So we need that kind of contrast, that before and after contrast relative to this point in time that I have in green. And there should not be a period there. Okay, so this fact helps explain why evidence of feathers is abundant in both the Cedar Mountain Formation fossils, the yellow, and the Hell Creek Formation fossils, no. This part of the end, although only the latter contain clear evidence of feathers, I mean, that's a little weird. You have abundant evidence, but not clear evidence. But in any event, this is not what we want, because we want a distinction between the two. You know, we've got that dividing line there that says, no, there's not going to be abundant evidence of feathered dinosaurs in the Cedar Mountain Formation, so we don't want to pick A. What about B? Does this fact help explain why evidence of feathers is abundant in fossils unearthed before the 20th century? Well, we don't have any information about fossils that were unearthed before the 20th century, because these were unearthed in the late 20th century, these were unearthed in the early 20th century, so that would be going beyond the scope of the passage, regardless of whatever else it might indicate. So we can eliminate that. C, does this fact help explain why evidence of feathers is abundant in the Cedar Mountain Formation fossils, which show partial feather impressions on several skeletons? No, we would not expect there to be evidence or abundant evidence of feathered dinosaurs in the Cedar Mountain Formation fossils, because those fossils were formed before the widespread sort of onset of feathered dinosaurs. And so D, the fact helps explain why evidence of feathers is abundant in the Hell Creek Formation fossils. Yes, while no such evidence has been found in the Cedar Mountain Formation fossils. So that one gives us the relevant distinction that we're looking for in terms of this before and after point. And so our answer there is going to be D. Let's look at another one. So again, logically completing the text. So if some skeletal remains unearthed at the Pleistocene site of Apodema in southern Greece date from 210,000 years ago, 210,000 years ago, 210K, that may support the hypothesis that early Homo sapiens populations migrated to Europe earlier than previously thought. Okay, we don't know when they were previously thought to have migrated, but the idea, I think, would be that they were previously thought to have migrated at some point after 210,000 years ago. But I'm not going to put that in the timeline yet because we don't know exactly where we'd put it. Okay, so on to the next sentence. It says, there is other evidence, however, strongly indicating that Neanderthals were the dominant hominin group. Hominin, I guess, is a broader family, perhaps, if that's the right word, genetically speaking, biologically speaking, that encompasses Neanderthals as well as Homo sapiens. Okay, so if they were the dominant hominin group in the region until 40,000 years ago, okay, so Neanderthals, dominant. Not sure when they started being dominant, but that goes up until 40,000 years ago. Okay, we've got that. We've got this. What does that suggest? Well, if both the 210,000-year-old remains and the Neanderthal dominance timelines are correct, it would suggest that what? Okay, and I think this one's a little tougher in terms of being able to anticipate exactly where it's going. But the important thing here is that our answer choice needs to be consistent with both of these pieces of information. Okay, and so A, Homo sapiens briefly inhabited the region before Neanderthals became the dominant hominin species there. I think that's at least somewhat plausible. If they inhabited the region, that could explain why and how those skeletal remains were found. If they did so before Neanderthals became the dominant hominin species, we'd have to adjust that a little bit, but that would at least be consistent. They came, maybe they left, or maybe they were outcompeted by the Neanderthals, but that does seem plausible. But let's check the others. So Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted in the region for at least 170,000 years. No. I mean, could that be the case? It's possible. And we get that 170,000 from subtracting 40 from a 210,000, but that is a very specific inference. And generally speaking, we don't want to infer really specific things. We want to infer general things that are consistent with the evidence, not things that could possibly be true, but we just don't have support for. And so, again, it's possible that they coexisted, but it's also possible that Homo sapiens, again, came and left. Okay, so C, the skeletal remains were misdated and likely belonged to a Neanderthal individual rather than a Homo sapiens individual. Well, that actually goes against our premise here, because this says if both this and that are correct. And so if this is correct, then they weren't misdated. So we never want to pick an answer choice that contradicts either direct evidence that's given or a premise that is stated like this. And so we don't want to pick C. And then D, Homo sapiens first arrived in Europe at least 40,000 years later than previously assumed. Again, we don't really know anything about when they were previously assumed to have arrived. And in fact, the passage is telling us that this information suggests that they may have migrated earlier. And so coming back to A is the only one that is consistent with this information. And so that's the one we want to pick.